Pastor Jarrett here with another book review. This book review is Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice by Scott David Allen. This is a real good book. I enjoyed it. It only took me a couple weeks to read. Very short, sweet, and to the point, and I highly recommend it. Now, to give you an idea, I'm just going to let you know about the author. Scott has spent his entire career in the area of Christian community development, poverty alleviation, and justice ministry. His passion is to help Christians understand the biblical worldview as the only sure foundation for healthy, flourishing lives and communities and culture. He is a founder and president of the Disciples Nations Alliance, an international discipleship ministry that exists to equip the church to rise to her full potential as God's principal agent in restoring healing and blessing and broken nations. The DNA is active in more than 100 countries worldwide. After serving with the International Development Organization, Food for the Hungry International, for 19 years, in both the United States and Japan, Scott teamed up with his friend and mentor, Darrell Miller and Bob Muffett, to launch the Disciple Nations Alliance in 2008. Scott is married to Kimberly and his proud homeschooler, father to his 5 beloved children. He currently lives in Phoenix, Arizona. This book I highly recommend. And this book is about how biblical justice and social justice are two different things. There are some people who are trying to make those two fit. The problem is social justice has a particular worldview about power, about authority, about switching of power, switching of money, and is very worldly and secular in nature. Biblical justice is focusing on what is a biblically right thing to do, and to understand that biblical justice does care about racism. Biblical justice does care about poor. Biblical justice does care, yes, about abortion. Biblical justice cares about true justice and true areas of equality, and that seeing everyone being made in the image of God, and therefore everyone having transcendent value, and that and so it does care about it, but social justice is not biblical justice. So this is a really good book. I highly recommend it. Now, to give you an idea more about the book, I'm going to read the back of it. It says, biblical Christianity and ideological social justice are distinct and incompatible worldviews. They are composed in their understanding of the ultimate reality, power, authority, human nature, morality, epistemology, and much more. These differences matter. They will inevitably lead to a vastly different kind of societies. The culture that is emerging around us from the worldview of critical social theory, and a lot of us are more familiar with critical race theory, but critical social theory or critical theory is actually really the overall umbrella idea that is over all of this. But critical social theory is one marked by hostility, division, and a false sense of moral superiority. A culture where truth is replaced by power and gratitude by grievance. A culture which your identity is defined by your tribe, and your tribe is always in conflict with other tribes. The hour is late, but I believe this is a still time. We, the Bible believing churches, must humble ourselves and cry out to God and courageously and defend the truth against the greatest worldview threat of our generation. Two of the people who recommend this book, one would be Wayne Grudem. Maybe you may have heard of him. He says he highly recommends this book. Another one is Tom Askell, and he is a senior pastor of Grace Baptist Church and also is a president of Founders Ministry. But Tom Askell says we have a long need a book like this. every serious Christian, especially every pastor, should read and heed the wisdom it contains. And let's see if there's any other ones that you might be interested in. Um, Nope, those are the main ones. There's some recommendations for this book, but those two most people know. This is a great book. I highly recommend it. And I think it does a good job explaining what is social justice worldview and what is a biblical worldview. In fact, it does that in the first chapter. So the first chapter is strange justice. And in strange justice, it really is talking about social justice. What is it and why is it strange? What is different about it? Then he goes over what biblical justice is. And a lot of us, we've never taken time to understand what is biblical justice? What does it look like? And he takes the time to go through that. Justice before judgment. And to some degree, this is the idea that we're seeing in our culture where people are judged and determined guilty before actually there's been a judgment. We need to deal with that there should be justice before we start judging people. Justice redefined, and again, we sit there in social justice, redefine justice to mean something else. Ideological core tenets of what are the core tenets of social justice, the ideological values and disvalues, an inroad into culture and the church. And this is where he really hits on how social justice has made its inroad into the culture, into the media, into politics, and now into the church. And this is why it's such a constraint. It's one thing when it's affecting the culture. It's another thing when it's affecting the church. And we're seeing church leaders that are supporting stuff like this and don't understand the underlying worldview behind it and how it has an eroding effect. Unlike in the if we go back, we had the um, social gospel, and in the social gospel, that's when a lot of these organizations that went out and one you probably most think of is YMCA. That was originally a church organization. Also, there's a lot of other churches, a lot of mainline denominations went the social gospel way. They figured we're going to spend our time here trying to help people, which was a noble goal, but the problem is sacrifice the gospel in the process. Well, this time, as we got the social justice now coming, it is still that same problem, but it is disguised in a way where people do not realize that they're sacrificing what the gospel really means for this helping people. And so, though they might have a noble goal, which is to help people, the problem is actually not helping people. And so, it really takes the time to explain that. Lesson driving out bad worldviews by offering a better one. Now, this last chapter was good because one of the things he clarifies is in the past, if we go back again back to the social gospel movement, one of the things that also was part of that was the fundamentalist movement. Now, the fundamentalist movement was a pushback against evolution, that was questioning the Bible, a pushback against the social gospel, a pushback on evolution, and it was pushing back against questioning people who are questioning the authority of the Bible. And so they said, nope, we're not going to be for that. We're going to be for the Bible. God's word is a literal inspired word of God, and we can trust it. That was a noble goal. That was good. One of the things that Scott explains is one of the problems is when that happened, the church, a lot of these fundamentalist church withdrew themselves from the culture. And instead of still having that cultural influence of being a cultural influence in art, movies, and stuff, they pulled back from that area. And then the secular world and the social gospel and all those, they moved into those areas because the church pulled out, and so these other organizations moved in, and it secularized it under this secular worldview, and that wasn't a healthy position to make to church to withdraw, and a lot of that is where a lot of us know about legalism. If you go to ask a past generation, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we weren't allowed to go see movies or play cards or go see artwork and stuff like that because they were trying to withdraw themselves from culture." Well, biblically speaking, though we are supposed to be not of this world, we are to be in the world, proclaim the gospel, to be salt and light in this world. That's something we're called to do. And Scott does a good job saying we need to be engaged in this world and engage the world and explain the biblical worldview and how things should be. And so he does an excellent job doing that. And so I really like this chapter because it says we need to engage our culture. We should be actively helping the poor. We should actively help those people who are having these teen pregnancies. Churches should be involved. We should have food pantries, and we should have clothes closets, and the church should be reaching out to those in need in our local community, and because that is what works. One of the things that I'm fortunate with the social justice movement is they see it's a systematic thing, and they go through the government and power. We just need to have more government organizations. And one thing we know from the past is government organizations don't actually solve the problem. And in fact, if you want to hear more about stuff like that, you want to read stuff by Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell really does a real good job explaining how government organized programs do not work. And I would recommend some of his works. And again, that's Thomas Sowell. You can YouTube him. So there's some great videos on him, such as by the Hoover Institute. But explains how government programs don't actually help people. The thing that was proven to help is church group charity, local charities, local communities. That is the best way to help out the people in need is a local church, your local charities. That's the best way because those organizations knows what's best, what needs for those communities. And so the church needs to be active in that. And so he creates this nice balance saying social justice isn't the way to fix this. And this is how we do fix it with biblical justice. And again, he doesn't just say reject social justice and doesn't fill it in and say, well, okay, well, those problems still exist. And he doesn't say we should ignore them. Right? He says social justice is a problem. We want biblical justice, and we need to find a biblical way to help those in need. And so he does that, and he does a very good job and explain it in this book. Now, I mentioned this earlier, a book that, so Scott does a good job explaining the current, really what's going on in the world. If you want to know what was some more of the roots of this movement, especially the social justice, social gospel, and how social justice came from the social gospel of the 1960s, then you should read Social Justice Goes to Church by Jon Harris. I've actually done a review on this, but this book does a real good job explaining the history of where the social gospel came from that now is being used to move to the social justice movement that we see in churches today. Both movements are not biblical, and they're very much more secular in origin. And so I highly recommend these two books. Now, in the future, I will be doing one on Voddie Bauchman's book, Fault Lines, when I get around to reading it. And another one is going to be by James Lindsay, who wrote a book on critical theory. I will read those, do a quick review of those. In the meantime, unfortunately, I have had several people recently give me other books I don't need to read. I need to read for church. Some members won't get my thoughts on some books, so I'll read those. And if I like them, or even if I don't like them, if I think it's worthwhile commenting on them, then I'll post them on here. But for right now, Why Social Justice, Not Biblical Justice by Scott David Allen. I highly recommend it. Your pastor should definitely read it, and if the church should also know about it. Calling social justice just communism or Marxism or socialism is not good enough. You have to understand what it believes and know how it does not match biblical worldview, because the younger generation, the millennials, Gen Z, they are very much supporting of social justice. And they don't understand when we say, no, that's not biblical justice. It doesn't work to say, well, it's a socialism, especially since this generation actually likes socialism. So you have to actually clearly define things to be able to explain it. And that's why we need to be reading books like this so we can engage the culture. So we talk to our young people and explain the truth and what it is. This is already going 50 minutes, so I need to close this up. So have a great day and God bless.